Okay, can you see that on the screen?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. So thanks very much. So I'm going to talk you through my interest in universal basic income or citizens' income, citizens' dividend, however you choose to call it. It is known by many different names. And I'm going to tell you about where I came from. So the reason why I'm in this group, I've been in this group since quite the early days, really. I've always been interested in food poverty from, when I started my academic career. And for my PhD, I found myself interviewing people in food banks up in Wales in the UK, trying to understand their lived experience of, in such a wealthy country as the UK, why we have people who are facing food insecurity and effectively begging for food from a charitable provision. And it got me to thinking about all the different policy mechanisms that are available to kind of help people navigate food poverty or navigate poverty in itself. And then I've started to think about, well, instead of keep focusing on what was happening at the end of the system, people, in such desperate situations that they're falling into poverty, why don't we start focusing upstream, looking up at the system at what's going wrong and trying to understand if the social security system could be altered in order to make people's lives better, because social policy, is there essentially to make people's lives better. So as a new form of social policy, I'm really interested in looking at basic income as a way to redefine the way we understand social security. So I'm going to talk you through these slides. The first part doesn't fully link to food and our understanding of food poverty or food insecurity. However, as we start to get to the end, you'll start to see that it's hopefully will start to make more sense in that food is just one tiny element of it. And in fixing the social security system so that it better reflects people's needs, it will hopefully fix all problems, I think. It's not a magic bullet and it's not a panacea, but I see a basic income as being something that can fix poverty on multiple levels or multiple types of poverty. So I see it as a way to, initially for me, for my interest, to end food bank use. So as I said, basic income is known by several different names, but it essentially should fall under these three tenets: is that it's universal or unconditional, that it's basic, it only covers your basic needs, and that it is provided as a form of income. So when we think about universal, we see that it should be for everybody. It's regardless of gender, it's regardless of income. So you can still earn lots of money, you can still have a finance, a corporate lawyer type of job with lots of money, and you would still receive it. So it is for anybody. And what we mean by that is that it's not means tested. So everybody receives the same payments regularly. And that regularity of it is important because it's a payment always. So you would receive it from birth all the way through till the end of your life. It really is a cradle to grave approach at understanding effective social security. And it will provide security for everybody equally and equally accessible as well. So it's for everybody, it's always, it's non-withdrawable. So the government can't take it off you for behavioural reasons. It's also, that starts to think, people then start to think, well, wait a minute, do we not need to earn any money? Do we not need to get a job if we're being provided with an income? But one of the important tenets of basic income is that it is basic. It only provides for your basic needs. Now, I know that people's basic needs are going to be different, but think about Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs: food, shelter, security. It provides a financial reward, effectively helping you meet just those levels, and it's provided as an income. So it is a financial payment. So it's not given in bread or in clothes or in any other sorts of handouts. It's cash. It's money in the bank that you can choose to spend however, wherever and whenever on whatever you like. So as I said, it can be known by different names as well, whether it's citizens' income, citizens' dividend, a universal basic income, an unconditional basic income, or just a basic income. Comes under many different names. So it is given to people as a right. So Malcolm Torrey, who is the chair of the Basic Income Earth Network, describes basic income more as citizens' income. So it can be linked to the idea of citizenship. Now, whether we go back to Marshall's understanding of citizenship, there are some difficult questions to ask around who is the sort of citizen who would receive a basic income. Does migration have a part to play? What about other areas? What about people who've just migrated? What about people who are here long term but are not registered as citizens? What level of income do they receive? Because essentially they would still receive a form of income as well. So having said that, ideally it would be something that is unconditional. It is given to people. There's no conditions attached to who receives it and how much who receives it. It isn't means tested. So what we mean by this, in the UK, we've got a very means tested system at the minute, which is universal credit, which essentially asks recipients of universal credit to jump through certain hoops in order to prove that they deserve social security. So a universal basic income, because it's given to people as a right, there is no means testing associated with it. It's given to people equally. There's also, because it says a right and it's universal and unconditional, there's no behavioralism attached to it. So people are not monitored by the state to make sure that they're behaving in order to receive basic income. And there's no tapering. So as we know with the UK system, the universal credit system, it's supposed to work as a taper. So the more you start to earn from earned income, your social security payments through universal credit start to decline. In a sense, everybody should still be kept above a basic minimum level of income. But we know from the universal credit, from studies on universal credit, that this doesn't actually happen yet. People who are on universal credit are still being plunged into poverty. What's also important about it being universal is that it's paid individually. So men, women receive exactly the same. If they're in a relationship, the male gets his payment and the female gets her payment. And this is quite important when we think about things around domestic violence and women's ability to be able to free domestic violent relationships. They've got their own payment in their own bank for them to do with whatever they please. Now, there are some people in the universal basic income movement who also advocate children receiving a certain level as well. Now, we don't offer figures. The network that I'm part of, the UBI Lab Network, we don't offer a figure. However, that does cause some controversy, and I think it is easy to try and offer some form of a figure. We do know that from the figures that are used at the minute on the pilots that happen of universal basic income, people are receiving somewhere usually between an extra £300 a month, which maybe about $500 US dollars. People are receiving somewhere between £300 a month, but also we've got a pilot which is currently happening in Wales where people are receiving £1,600 a month, which is probably somewhere near $2,000. So we've got a vast difference in the numbers of what we predict a universal basic income figure could be. So if we think about, a ballpark figure of around about £500 per individual per month forever, just to get people thinking about what you would do should you have this definite given right to cash every month, and it's paid equally. Now, as we know, the capitalist system kind of works top down. The capitalist is at the top and everybody else kind of works below them, and capital is funneled upwards. That's as far as I'm going to go. I'm not an economist, but it does create a system of winners and losers. And what we see is the higher up this capitalist pyramid you go, you become more of a winner, and those at the bottom become more of a loser. So basic income aims to make everybody a winner at a certain level. And you can then continue in your high flying job and earn even more money, but your basic needs will be taken care of. It offers basic security in this capitalist system. It's regular and predictable, so it's paid every month or every week, however the government chooses to pay it. It's paid regular and it's predictable. So you know that your money is going to be in your account at the end of the week or at the end of the month. Now, we do know from some certain studies that people really do depend on certain pockets of money. In the UK, for example, when Universal Credit, our social security system, moved from being paid fortnightly, people knew that they had regular pots of money every 2 weeks. And then the government moved the payment of the new social security system, Universal Credit, became a monthly paid system, which caused a lot of people who had never been able to budget across these 2 weeks gaps now had to spread their money across a 4-week gap. And this was ideologically done by a conservative government as a way to show people who are out of work what it is like to have an income, and therefore that they can start to plan and start to be more structured in their lives. But for some people, it simply is a very difficult situation to navigate around. It's also non-withdrawable, and this is associated with the non-behavioralism aspect of it. The government cannot take it off you for not applying for a certain amount of jobs or for bad behavior. It cannot be taken away from you. Now, I have got a critical point about this that I'm still very unsure of, and some people within my network were trying to work our heads around this. What would happen with criminals? If somebody's been convicted of a crime and being sentenced and being locked away for 3 or 4 years, do they still continue to receive their basic income? Or does part of their income go to, victim surcharge or arrest, given to the victims of their crime? Because essentially, if a person is locked away for 2 or 3 years, they're going to come out with a very large bank balance. What does that then mean? We know that people recommit crime because of a lack of money when they are released. So it could work in order to steer people away from reoffending. But we also know that it could also act as something that could be drawn on by the right wing by saying, well, if you go to prison, you get to save up your money for a very long time and come out as a multimillionaire. So it's got a problem. I'm not yet convinced on how to get around this problem yet. So I've just mentioned left and right approaches. A UBI has been discussed across the political spectrum, from those on the left, whether it's Keynes or those on the right. But I want to look at just, Thomas More originally discussed the idea of it in some of his early work in his book Utopia, and he was describing this utopic place where people didn't want for anything. And what he was hinting at there was possibly this idea that of universal basic income could be something that could help. Martin Luther King has spoken about it, but it's the work of Thomas Paine, Rights of Man, Thomas Paine, who really addressed where the idea of a universal basic income has come from, where it's going to, and also an idea about how a universal basic income could be funded. So in his pamphlet on agrarian justice, I pulled these two quotes out of it because I thought they really kind of encapsulate what his approach was. So Thomas Paine, obviously writing in 1797, argued that the earth and its natural uncultivated state is the common property of the human race. What he's saying here is that ideally everybody should be born on the planet equal, that nobody has a stake in land and nobody owns any of this ownership of property. Nobody owns the land. We are essentially all born as equal people with an equal inheritance to this land. Yet what's happened is through the Industrial Revolution and the capitalist system is that some people decided to put a fence around a certain plot of land and then say, we're all born equal, but I own that bit there. That's my plot of land. And anything that comes from that land, should you want it, you're going to have to pay for it, either by buying the product off that land or by working for me to farm that land, as an example, through farming. So Paine's argument against this is that every proprietor of, piece of parceled up part of land, therefore, owes the community essentially a ground rent for how long they've owned that plot of land for. So for the land which he owns, and then it is from this ground rent that he proposes that we could be able to fund something such as a basic income. Now, although this is an old argument, this is the same argument which is currently being used by Yanis Varoufakis. And the way he's looking at it is through a ground rent on a digital footprint that we all create. So there is a modern iteration of this. So everything that we do online creates a digital footprint, our data. Now, our data is valuable pieces of information about who we are and how Amazon, for example, can target us with certain products. And every click we make creates more and more data, which is then bought and sold. So we can see that there's a modern argument here of how a universal basic income could be funded through, for example, the collection of data, and that these very large profitable companies like Google and Amazon can start to maybe give us some of this money back, because essentially it's publicly created finance that becomes privatized. We create all the data, we create all the money, and then it gets privatized into smaller and smaller hands. So for Payne's argument, he argues that where we're essentially at now with the rollout of farming and people buying up land is that we, as a common group of individuals, we're losing our natural heritage, our natural inheritance. It's our inalienable right over our own land. So this brings me on to look at, brought me around to look at the work of Guy Standing, taking Payne's argument further in a modern iteration of it. Guy Standing wrote a fantastic book about the plunder of the commons and how the common land, which should be ours, has been bought and sold throughout the capitalist system, and it's removing land, or the wealth of the land as a public good is being removed from our common inheritance. Then he went on to write a fantastic book about the 8 giants. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but a universal basic income is what he's arguing across all of these giants is what's needed to be able to tackle eventually the end extinction of the human race. And he talks about how inequality is driven by the capitalist system, and therefore having a basic income, instead of having a top-down system of the capitalist system that we've got at the minute, takes the capitalist system upside down, and it makes money work for us at the bottom, and that we have the right and the ability and the desire and the places that we wish to spend it. And it starts to equalize the capitalist system. So we can see how this system is unequal, and that's what he's arguing in this chapter. And then that leads to insecurity, and when people feel insecure, they become quite precarious in their work, and that triggers people to fall into debt. And it's this debt which leads on to us becoming quite stressed. Stress makes us probably in more debt, but it also makes us more precarious in our work as well. So I'm going to just go through the ones that I've highlighted there of stress, precarity, and automation. And for those of you who work in academia, automation has been something that we're now currently really worried about with this new program called ChatGPT as a way of automating students' essays. And there is a real interesting link there with the automation of our own industry and why we may need a basic income. So in his book, Guy Standing argues that we're becoming more stressed in our lives, and it's associated with this capitalist system. And that's because the resources are becoming more scarce. And when resources become scarce, we become quite defensive over our ownership of those resources, or our ability to be able to claim those resources. And we think about the financial system, think about what he calls, or what Shafir calls, mental bandwidth, which is your ability as a person who's living in poverty to make decisions that are beneficial to you. He says, Shafir argues that people who are living in poverty, their mental bandwidth becomes reduced because they're too busy trying to just survive for that day or that hour, or to make a decision, not realizing actually that making such a decision could end up having a long-term impact on your life. Being in poverty reduces people's thinking abilities and thinking skills to make good decisions when they need to. So it reduces our mental bandwidth. So it really, really increases our short-term, or our awareness of short-term choices. And what I would then think of is actually our lack of short-term choices, because people who live in poverty, as we know, don't have the ability to always make the best choices. Sometimes they simply don't have a choice, and they can only deal with what they've got. We can see this through things such as the poverty premium and the argument that poor people, people who live in poverty, inevitably don't make poor decisions. They just have to make the decision, live with the decision that they've got. So it's not that poor people make poor decisions, it's just they don't have any other option. So the poverty premium kind of identifies this area that people who are in poverty inevitably end up paying more for the same types of goods and services. So for example, if you live in an area of multiple deprivation and you own a car, your insurance is probably more expensive than somebody who lives in an area of lower deprivation. Or if you top up your gas and electricity through a prepaid gas and electricity meter, instead of paying by direct debit, the tariffs are usually set higher. And there's a long history of discussions around poverty premium in terms of people who end up trading, the products that they own in shops and then having to buy them back at the end of the week when they've got the money to, or people who get loans, people who have a bank account, people who have a mortgage can usually get a better loan return rate than people who don't. So we know that the poverty premium exists, and what universal basic income aims to do is to provide people with the stability there so that they don't fall into stressful positions such as this, so that they don't have to make rash decisions in order, do I buy food this week or do I pay my gas bill this week? Those decisions inevitably come zero sum game decisions that people don't have to make, because they should have finances to be able to do both. So Standing also argues that being in a stressful position because of debt and precarity leads to people making poor decisions, probably rash decisions. But all of this behind them, there's a precarious working system that people are entering in. And Guy Standing calls these the precaria. And it's the idea that people who are possibly in work, possibly going through these cycles of in work and out of work, these times when people have jobs and the low pay, no pay cycle, as Kaylee called it in their book a few years ago. People move through these bits and pieces kind of lives where they don't actually establish themselves as being somebody who has some sort of substance about their job. We all did this when we first joined this meeting. Hi, I'm Dave, I'm a lecturer of social policy, and I do this, this, and this. So we, because of the inevitability of where we are and the stability that some of us may have in our jobs, allows us to create some form of occupational identity. But Guy Standing argues in his book, The Eight Giants, that people who live in the precariat people don't have the time, the ability, or the financial resources to be able to develop themselves with an occupational identity. Now, this leads more to more stress and more debt and living in more and more precarious life. And also it comes along with a loss of certain employment rights. So in the UK, we have 0 hours contracts. I don't know if it's the same over in North America, but 0 hours contracts are quite a difficult thing to live with. I've had them before doing this job. There was sometimes when I was a student and I had 3 0 hours contract jobs, and I would move from one job to the next job to the next job, just in order to make sure that we could still pay the rent and keep our children fed. Now, when you're on a 0 hours contract, it's very difficult to be able to say, well, I need a holiday, because you don't actually get holiday pay. That 0 hours contracts pay, you may be on a higher hourly rate than minimum wage, because you're supposed to factor in saving a portion of that money for when you want a holiday. So people end up losing some of their employment rights, such as the right to a holiday. And what we also know is precarity. People who are leaving, for example, we've just been discussing before we started the industrial action that's been happening in the UK across all sectors, but mainly in HE, students leaving the sector with a degree or with a postgraduate degree and not actually being able to enter into the workforce at a level that they would like to. So we know that there's levels of underemployment and people feeling underutilized as well. Where we're at currently, for those of you who've been watching the developments with ChatGPT, we can see that automation is inevitable. We are being automated out of work. Now, this has been happening for a very long time. We could talk about the Luddites, for example, but modern automation of work, self-service checkout tills in supermarkets have been there now for about 10 years or so. That is a form of automation in a working class industry. Driverless cars, driverless trucks that Amazon are developing, or the little drive, or the machines that work in Amazon factories, which go around and pick all the things. People are being automated out of working class jobs, for an example. You know, if you've got a bank of 10 or 20 self-service tills in a supermarket being overseen by one supervisor, that's 19 jobs that have been potentially displaced. So automation is inevitably displacing people from work. So it's, you know, eventually there will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better than a human. Now, this is beneficial to employers, obviously, because it saves them money. After they develop the product, fine, that may cost a lot of money to develop that product. However, inevitably, it means that they can reduce, you know, there's no staff, there's no labor costs, there's no holiday pay, there's no sick pay, there's no redundancy pay, there's no, well, there's redundancy pay, but there's no pensions to think about. There's just maintenance. So it's a boon for industries such as Elon Musk's, or those at the top of the capitalist pyramid like Jeff Bezos. And also they do also support the idea of a basic income, because they see the changes that are happening in their industry. And as capitalists, they recognize, well, wait a minute, if nobody's got any employment, nobody's earning any money, our industry will inevitably fail. So we need people to still have money so that they can still keep spending in the economy, so that we can keep our business going. So Bezos and Elon Musk are fans of basic income as well. So it's not just a socialist idea. It very much does also live within the capitalist economy as well. And it's not just going to be impacting working class industries such as supermarkets. ChatGPT is huge. I wrote a blog and posted it on my website last weekend. It must have been a 1,000-word blog about AI and universal basic income. And in the final paragraph, out of 6 or 7 paragraphs, was the only paragraph I actually wrote. And I made a point of it. I underlined it and said, this is the only paragraph I've written. I just asked ChatGPT to write me an essay about basic income and AI. 3 seconds later, it had written me 1,000 words. So writers, academics, people who make a living from, you know, using words and computers are also going to be at risk of their jobs being automated out of existence. I mean, even in teaching, you know, I teach. Today I've been teaching and there was 50 odd students there, but I've been recorded my lecture. So what's to say that next year, in front of a massive online lecture, that somebody doesn't just press play and repeat my video over to a massive audience already? So all of these industries are at risk of being automated away. So there needs to be something that's going to fill that void. If all jobs eventually become automated, or not all jobs, I agree that some jobs can't be, but a lot of jobs will be automated, and inevitably there's going to have to be something financial that fills that void. Otherwise we can't keep spending and we can't survive. So I'm going to talk about UBI and its benefits, but there's a really important question to ask. And this is what I usually get asked when people say, you know, when I talk about basic income, if I said to you that you're going to receive $1,000 a month, you're going to receive it, your husband or your wife is going to receive $1,000 a month, you're going to get a boost of $1,000 every month into your house. Well, what if people just stop working? If I'm receiving an extra £1,000, so is my wife, would I continue working? I would be able to pay my rent, my bills, my food, I'd be able to do everything. Would I still need to work? And that's one of the critical questions that I've been thinking about as a sociologist. What is work? What do we value of being work? So I'm also then reflecting on, well, will people actually stop working? And David, you know, the late great David Graeber argued this in his book, Bullshit Jobs, that people inevitably wouldn't stop working. Because think about people who are incarcerated, for example. Doing a job in prison is something that they want to do. It motivates them, it lifts people up. People also have ambitions. And I think when I thought about it, if I received £1,000 a month and my wife received £1,000 a month, I don't think I'd give up my job. I quite like my job. You know, my job's quite entertaining. I actually have some value and some love and some desire to do what I do as an academic at a university. I like my job. I wouldn't give up my job. And when asked, most people actually think that others will stop working. So we've still got this process of othering, which happens at this end of the welfare spectrum as well. People think that others will give up their job. They all see themselves as being, well, I'm the hardworking one. I wouldn't give up my work, but I know that those scroungers, lying on the couch smoking all day, they wouldn't even bother working anyway. Or those people who are working at the hotel, they'd inevitably give up their job. And that is really interesting point. So, for example, I think some people would give up work, but I think they'd be doing it to make a point. So what I think is that having a universal basic income would inevitably bring some wages down. Those wages who, David Graeber identifies as being bullshit wages, like the corporate lawyer, for example, those wages would inevitably start to fall. But the working class sector, the wages would pick up. Now, this is something that wasn't actually realized at first, because people thought that if you've got a basic income, that wages would fall. Wages in the working class industry would inevitably come down. But the opposite is true, that wages will rise. And I use this argument through looking at like a hotel cleaner, for example. So if you work in a hotel, and I use this example because I used to work in a hotel. So if you work in a hotel, let's say it's got 10 bedrooms or something like that, and you've now got a basic income, the original argument would be that your employer would just drop your wage because you've got a basic income. He can start to pay you lower and lower amounts, or he could keep it at minimum wage and never pick it up. Doesn't need to, because you're still going to be able to be financially viable. Well, possibly that person would say, well, wait a minute, I don't need this job anymore. I'm going to leave and I'm going to find a better job. So as the hotel cleaner then decides to leave that job, the hotel room still needs cleaning. So the employer is then stuck with this problem. Either he cleans it himself, or he makes the job look more attractive to bring in another cleaner, which would inevitably mean that wages in that industry should pick up. And that's the theory behind it, hopefully. So that leads me to, yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt your flow, but just I messaged you on the chat, but realized you might not see it. I was just going to say, if you've got like a couple, like about 5 minutes or so, just to, and then maybe we can discuss in the discussion, particularly around food. But yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Don't come to the end. Sorry, I do apologize. Right, so that made me think, well, what is work? What do we value about work? And I think that maybe we need to start thinking about work differently. Hi, I'm Dave, and I'm whatever I want to be. Sometimes I'm a cook, sometimes I'm a jogger, I'm always a dad, I'm a husband. Why do we always feel the need to introduce ourselves as, hi, I'm Dave, and I'm a social scientist? People have got lots of other things in their lives that they do that are far more important than their work. I won't stand on public good, but UBI for me is a public good. Investment in people, investment in time, investment in resources. Inevitably, it's an investment in people. And invisible housework. So a universal basic income rewards people effectively for doing domestic work, which is predominantly done by women, or caring responsibilities, for example, predominantly done by women. It's a reinvestment in what we actually value as being socially responsible and socially valuable work, instead of valuing those at the top who do probably a lot less harder work than those people at the bottom, or those people who don't get paid. Okay, I won't talk about casual labour or investment in people. But we know that the arts is massively underfunded, and the creative side of work is massively underfunded as well. Okay, so I'll skip all that. Right, so where we are now, I'm part of the UBI Lab Network. We are a very loose network of 40 plus labs, and a lab is essentially what it sounds like. It's a place for studying and thinking and talking about universal basic income. Most of our labs are based in the UK, so I think 30 odd of our labs are based in the UK. We've got UBI Lab Washington as well, but a lot of our labs are also non-geographic, which is where I'm part of. So I co-chair the UBI Lab Food, which is a non-geographic lab. We're interested in looking at the food system and how a universal basic income could revolutionize the food system, how and where we could disrupt the food system through using a basic income. Obviously, people, the end user, would be pulled out of poverty. But what about the farmer? What about people being able to spend in local farmers markets? What about people being able to make better choices about their foods? That should be another place where we can interject universal basic income as being valuable to understanding the food system. We fit quite well with the ideas of the Global Solidarity Alliance. You know, we are really a rights-based approach to food. We are, you know, there is calls for a cash-first approach. This is the ultimate cash-first approach. It's a cash-always approach, that people have always got an income. So we see this as being like the end of food banks. There's a link there, you can take yourself to it. Stanford University Basic Income do a lot of work at Stanford University on basic income as well. And this is Michael Tubbs. He piloted, or was responsible for piloting, a UBI in Stockton in California, apparently the foreclosure capital after the Great Recession. Revolutionized how people think about it. So you can find some of their details there. Thanks very much. Sorry for waffling on and rambling on.
Oh, thanks so much for that, Dave. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of questions, and yeah, I could have definitely listened to you talk about it for longer. But yeah, just anybody got questions or thoughts to what Dave's been telling us about this afternoon?
I'm sorry. Okay, I was trying to unmute. This is Saida. I had to join by telephone. Thank you, Dave, for the presentation. I am curious about pilot programs that have tried universal basic income, like at a city level. I'm aware of that in the United States, where I'm located. Do you know much about like how it's been tried on a small scale, like at a city level? Usually it's for a particular population, is my understanding. Thank you.
Yeah, there has been some, and I was looking last night on Stanford University. They've done an interactive map where you can see every single pilot which is happening across the world currently. But strangely, the one that I talk about, the Wales one, isn't on their map. But there's over 100 pilots at the minute being conducted across just the United States. Some are at a city level, some are at, you know, just a very small community level, but also some are at a much larger level as well. And what we see is that most of these are actually being funded by private money. So, for example, the Stockton trial was part funded by one of the CEOs of Facebook, who pumped in millions of pounds. So there does seem to be this investment from private capital, possibly as a reflection that they realize that people need to have money to keep spending in the system. But the Stanford website is fantastic for looking up specific resources. If you are interested in understanding what is happening at a city level near you, there possibly is a trial, because like I said, there's over 100 happening in the US alone.
Dave, and yeah, just before I come to you, Gizem, I just want to say hello and welcome to Rick and Rosemary. Sorry, I didn't see you on the call before when Dave was presenting, but yeah, thanks for joining us. Gizem, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave, for sharing this work. I think it's very exciting if it happens. I also see it in like, not like the general income. I think it's not the same, but like, for example, for new mothers, they try, instead of like telling you can buy this and this product, what if we just give them cash? And then those experiments are wildly successful compared to just tying and everything to XYZ. But my worry in the capitalist system that we live in is that once you give basic income, what if the prices of everything goes up so high that it's like same thing with like the minimum wage situation, that it's no longer enough, because they I feel like that there are so many of those games that you do something good and then it just changes. So you're like, okay, I gotta catch up again type of thing.
Yeah, this is probably the most, after the question about people giving up work, this is the most asked question about inflation. It's usually, won't a UBI be inflationary or cause inflation inevitably? Also, if people have more money, won't the capitalist system just raise its bar so that people don't have any more money than what they need? I find it difficult to answer, only because I'm not economically clever. My opinion on it is, think about LCD TVs or Teslas. The price of them when they first hit the market is quite expensive, and then the more people start to buy them, the price starts to come down. I think if people have got money, the more people who are spending money in the economy, the prices of things are kept lower. I don't know if an economist can tell me that that's wrong or right. I don't know. But I think if more people are spending more money, the price of things inevitably comes down. I think inflation tends to happen when people hoard their money away, but people who need money inevitably spend money, and I think it gives. I think if you give working class people enough money to spend, they will spend it, and it will. I think it will revolutionise some of the industries that tend to trap people in poverty. So, for example, take housing. So in the UK. I've got a pretty good salary. I've got a permanent job, contracted job at university. I'm on a nice professional wage. I can't afford to buy a house because inevitably I'm trapped in this cycle of having to pay rent, so I can't save a deposit to buy a house. What a UBI does is it'll free up this money. For example, if I've got an extra £1,000, so as my wife, we can save £2,000 a month to start saving for a deposit to free ourselves from this, from being stuck in the housing trap. And what I think it will inevitably do then is it will take the housing system from being controlled by landlords to actually being controlled by people, because I'll have the ability to put my landlord out of business because I'll say, I don't need to rent your house anymore. I do accept that some people will still want to rent houses, but then landlords are going to have to be more competitive. So therefore, they're going to have to make their housing more attractive. And what makes housing more attractive, apart from having it at a lower cost, I don't know. So maybe it could revolutionise the capitalist system that way. Maybe.
Thanks, Dave. So many wheels turning, and I've thought of UBI in relationship to carbon, and like, what if that was the actual metric, like on a global scale, or everybody gets, But I want to go back to food charity, and maybe the carbon questions for the lab. And I had no idea that this was such a broad swath of people looking at specific industries and themes. And so I'm wondering if you can go a little bit deeper on the food theme. You specifically said this will, lead to the disappearance of food charity, but we also have billions and billions of dollars invested in this infrastructure and people that enjoy feeding other people for the joy of it. So will it actually disappear, or will it flourish into something else? Like, what's going to happen to the warehouses, the kitchens, that are the center of our charitable food network?
What I can say is that my point on ending food bank use definitely comes from a UK perspective, where we are nowhere near the same level of entrenched food charity that we know happens in the US and Canada. A lot of our food pantries or food banks, or whatever we want to call them, haven't made such investments in infrastructure. And it is something that I would hope food charity does in the UK, especially, does never invest in that level of infrastructure, even as far as refrigeration and fridge freezers and trucks to deliver food and to warehousing. I would hope that our food charity system doesn't invest to that level, because at the minute we're on the precipice of that, I think. But I think at the minute, if we don't invest in those, it's easier to go back to where we were. But after you've made that investment, there's a lot of money involved in it then. And then we maybe see what happens. I also receive the regular email from Food Bank News, about how well these food charities are doing. And I think that's part of the investment. So maybe me talking from a UK perspective maybe is a little bit different than a US perspective. But I think in the position we are still in the UK, we still have time to turn our backs on food charity if people get, for example, a basic income.
Yeah, but I guess my question is, do they turn around and go spend that at, one of 4 corporately controlled food stores? And is that better? I mean, what kind of, and you talked about diverse economies in the food system and, the potential for UBI to create alternative food futures. And I guess I'm just, if you give people income to turn around and go spend it at Walmart, which is currently the SNAP program, right? In the US, billions and billions funneled into corporate retail. What are the kind of nodes that we're going to start building a renewed food system from? And I'm just coming at it as like,
it's okay.
Yeah.
My thoughts on this are probably exactly the same way that you're going. I would like to see an investment in local butchers, local bakers, local greengrocers, a step away from our Walmarts, you know, Tesco's and Asda's, and for people to really invest back in their community. Now, something similar did happen in a small area in the UK in the southwest, in Totnes, just down near Cornwall. What they did was they created what's called a Totnes pound. Now, in this Totnes pound, for example, if you lived there, you could exchange part of your wage for a Totnes pound. And what it was multiplied. So for every pound you invested, you got 2 Totnes pounds back. And you could only spend them, for example, you couldn't spend them in Tesco, they wouldn't accept them, but you could spend them in your butchers and your bakers and your candlestick makers, and people were reinvesting in local economies because there was the desire there to do it. Now, I used to live on Anglesey, and I thought this, with a universal basic income, Anglesey is a little island just off the coast of Wales, and a universal basic income, for example, piloted on an island size level where you can contain it and say that, right, we're going to have, for example, an Anglesey pound. And what we're going to do is, for every pound you spend in a local baker's with your Anglesey pound is worth double, or, you know, worth maybe double, to see what if it does really stimulate people to use those local provisions again. And I think it will. And I think what it will do is it'll steer people away from using supermarkets. You know, supermarkets have got that power that they can really, really lower the costs, which is really detrimental to the rest of the food chain. I would hope that could happen.
But yeah, thanks so much for that, Dave.
Thanks very much.
And yeah, great conversations.